We should talk about Madam. Madam is a book about a teacher who goes to this Scottish boarding school and discovers that there's weirdness afoot. Originally, I picked this up because I'm on a Gothic kick right now, and I love anything Gothic, and Gothic dark academia, but for adults, sounded like a great time. So I had to pick it up. I noticed that the reviews on Goodreads weren't great, but just because the reviews on Goodreads aren't great doesn't mean that I'm not going to love it. There's lots of books that I love that other people hate. So I was like, I'm going to give this a go. I was not expecting what I got out of this. Let's discuss. We open on our main character, Rose, who is a teacher, talking to her overbearing, ultra feminist mother about how she has big imposter syndrome about this job that she's just gotten. She's recently gotten a job at Bray Hall, which is an all girls boarding school, very prestigious, very elite, lots of the top British families send their kids there. It's on this Scottish island, which just sounds gloomy and dramatic and like it's really old and really pretty. And she feels wildly underqualified. But she was apparently submitted by special request. They headhunted her. They sent out a couple of people for interviews, and she got this really prestigious job as a teacher, a classics teacher specifically. We find out very early on that her mother is big feminist. This will be important later. But essentially, she's described as just basically being a terrible mom and a terrible person, but she did burn her bras in the 70s. So Rose, mousy little Rose, gets up to Bray. It's really pretty. She meets the lady that I'll refer to as the evil headmistress, Vivian, who is just terrible and also vague, extremely vague. She's just like, yes, you'll figure it out. Great, ta-ta. Like, through the whole book, she is like that. Gives very little information, expects Rose to be a mind reader. We also meet a couple of other colleagues. We meet the only lesbian, secret closeted alcoholic lesbian on campus. Again, great representation. And also the hot guy, love interest, who's also a teacher there. His name is Anthony. I think his only personality trait is being hot. If you're seeing a trend here with the characters that they all only have one personality trait, that's also true for Rose. Her only personality is being a classics teacher. That is all I can tell you about her. She just does that. It's her whole thing. We also find out fairly early on that the school has basically kidnapped Rose's mother and put her in an institution that Rose couldn't possibly afford on her own. Her mother has, I think it's Parkinson's, and she's in like a long-term care facility, and they take her out of the one that she was in and plop her where they want her to be without telling Rose. This just like comes up in conversation when she's talking with her supervisor. And Rose is like, wait, what? Why did nobody tell me about this? Why did nobody consult me on this? And the response is, well, of course. We said they take care of your dependents. It's in your contract. Didn't you read your contract? Why are you being so weird about this? Which, of course, she's being weird about it. I, I understand that the author is trying to say that, like, everyone in the school is so completely brainwashed that they don't understand why none of this is, you know, normal. But the fact that they invite this newcomer to the school and then just like don't tell her anything, and then also get irritated when she's questioning, it's just repetitive and annoying, and it just feels like the characters are being deliberately obtuse and not just like it's a symptom of their brainwashing. Like it's just a constant thing where Rose finds something out, she goes to people, they're like, yes, of course. Why are you being weird about it? And don't give her any further information. And it's just over and over and over and over again, so that you realize that everybody is useless and that we're completely wasting time talking to anybody. And it's just like, this doesn't move the plot forward in any conceivable way. It just is frustrating to witness. And Rose never finds a way to get past this. It's a problem that Rose never solves. But essentially, she finds this out. She's like, I should talk to somebody about that. I'm going to read you a quote. She hadn't yet dared to challenge the secretaries regarding her mother either. Rose just wanted her first week to end. So it's over a week that they've essentially kidnapped her mother and put her somewhere without Rose's consent. And Rose is like, I'm just too tired to talk to the secretaries about it. When she eventually does talk to the secretaries are like, okay, would you like to be consulted? And Rose is like, yeah. But she doesn't go visit her mother. She visits her mother at some point, but she doesn't immediately go visit her mother. She doesn't immediately say, get my mother out of there. What did you do? I'm quitting, like any normal person would. She's just like, okay. She just accepts this. And it becomes a major plot point later on as they blackmail her with her mother's health, being like, if you leave, we're going to murder your mother. Which could have been avoided if she'd just quit that first time when she had no repercussions. It just doesn't make sense the way that Rose delayed reacting to something that big and then just essentially didn't react at all when given the chance. It doesn't seem like something a normal person would do. The excuse given is that, well, my mother is in much better care than I could afford. But I think any reasonable person would realize that that's some shady shit, you know? So the stage has been set. So the girls in both of these classes, particularly the younger ones, they just outright tell her that they scared off the last classics teacher, her predecessor. Rose says nothing in response to this. She just goes back to her lesson. She does talk to one of the other teachers about it, or a couple of the other teachers about it later, but she never gets an answer out of anybody. And mostly what concerns me is that she just let the child say that to her and didn't do anything about it. And I'm going to read you another passage of just an example of some of her classroom management skills. And you're a bitch, Freddie answered from the front. Whoa, Rose straightened up with her hands raised. Girls. Sticks and stones, Freddo, Josie shouted, her beetle black eyes sparking with emotion as she tipped her chair back. Careful what you say to me. And you, madam. Skipping forward a little bit. Rose says nothing in response to that. Be kind to each other? Josie mocked in a loud voice. Josie, I'm warning you. Madam, you're so tragic. Josie pulled a face. Just as well you're stuck in ancient times. When you finally work out what's really going on, you'll never be able to catch up. Out! Something in Rose had snapped. Get out of my classroom. No need. Josie raised her thick eyebrows with the bell's confirmation. This is the end of the lesson anyway, madam. And they all just leave, and Rose says absolutely nothing. This girl Josie is never punished in any way. And not all of the girls, but many of the girls treat her like this. Just consistently. Everyone treats Rose like shit. She does absolutely nothing. Okay, so here's the other thing about this book. The author, as you can clearly read on the back page, is also a classics teacher. More and more I started to feel like this character was just a self-insert, because the classics is just jammed in there. There's a lot of short stories periodically throughout of strong Greek women, which is supposed to tie in the plot, and we'll get there. But it never really does. It's just, you're a strong feminist woman, and they'll talk a little bit about it in the classroom, and that's kind of it. We don't see it reflected in any of the characters' actions, particularly Rose's. And I just wonder, considering she is a teacher, you would think that she would know what to write to, like, I don't know, talk to the headmistress about your girls talking shit about you. Like, she just never does anything about it, which is what bothers me. It's not that, you know, teenage girls are always going to be not nice. or some teenage girls are going to be not nice. That's just part of being a teenager. But the fact that she just doesn't handle it, I think, speaks a lot to her character. And it really just feels like a self-insert in a lot of senses. One girl in particular who is not in any of Rose's classes, Bethany, she is clearly out to get Rose because she really liked her predecessor, Jane, and she just wants Rose to get out of there. So there's a couple of incidents with Bethany. Bethany's like following her through the halls. She's at one point comes up to Rose's house in the dormitories and like starts screaming. There's an incident where Bethany goes to the headmistress and alleges that Rose has like physically grabbed and pushed her, and she has bruises to prove it, which is completely unproven. It takes a very long time for Rose to prove her innocence. Essentially, all that happens is the headmistress says, well, we have to take the girl seriously. They post a bunch of notices around the school publicly telling everybody about this, which I find interesting. Like, obviously, this is just the author's way of like shaming Rose and getting her to realize that the school is not normal. But also, I can't imagine why any school would do that, mostly for the privacy of the student, right? And, you know, also, there's a bunch of influential people at that school. You would think that they wouldn't want parents thinking that there was something wrong with the teachers, right? Like, you don't want that kind of bad PR unless you know that that teacher was a bad egg. And even then. So, anyway, there's a whole thing with Bethany, who hates her. Particularly, there's one instance where Bethany, despite not being enrolled in Rose's class, just comes into class after they've both been explicitly told to stay away from each other. And Rose is like, you can't be here. And Bethany's like, I'm gonna stay. And Rose is like, okay. And just continues on with the lesson. Despite this girl having claimed that she like physically abused her, and like at that moment I would be leaving the classroom and running to get another teacher, being like, you need to watch this interaction. This girl cannot be in my class for her own safety. Like, Rose has no backbone, is I guess what I'm trying to say. She has no backbone, and it's really hard to root for a main character that doesn't have any backbone. And doesn't get one either at any point. There's no character development. It is flat. We will also get to that. But Bethany is a really good example of how Rose sees problems, is confronted with problems, and does nothing about the problems. So we are about halfway through the book now. It has been plodding along. It has virtually all just been classroom drama. And not even drama, just classroom stuff this whole time. We've gotten a couple of scenes with like her flirting with her love interest, and we've gotten a couple of scenes with like her lesbian alcoholic BFF, with essentially give us nothing. Nothing has been added until this point, where Rose finally finds out what the big twist of the school is. Are you ready? I want you to sit back and guess for a second what this could possibly be. Did you guess? Okay. Essentially, the school is training up girls to be married off in arranged marriages to high-ranking British people. Anyone who can pay enough money, essentially. So they're taken through all of these discipline classes and etiquette classes and all of this. And at the end of the year, they go to this big ball and they get kind of like auctioned off. And it's based on their value. They get assigned a value, which decides what kind of like tier of guy that they get matched with, essentially. So they're highly incentivized to do very well across like all of these things so they can get a better husband. This isn't terribly shocking. It feels very much spelled out. Rose is, of course, just... The book literally describes her as being, like, pressed up against the blackboard just when she finds this out, which is just a bit comical. But she finds out the truth. about this school. So this is the part where they threaten her about her mom, and she realizes she can't leave because then they'll kill off her mom. So she just has to participate in this school where they're marrying off kids. Pretty straightforward. Shortly after she figures this out, Bethany, the girl that was stalking her before, she falls off a cliff. It seems like she threw herself off the cliff, but there are definitely questions about whether or not the school drove her to it, which obviously they did, or if someone like actually pushed her. This is never fully resolved. It's just like a sad thing that happens in the book. It doesn't really lead anywhere, and it doesn't really push Rose into action in any way. It doesn't have any effect in the story, which makes me question why it was put there. We also get a very gratuitous pedophilia scene where, and I'm not going to go into detail about this. It was just really gross. I'm sure you can probably guess what was happening, but essentially, as they train the girls, they train them on lots of things. It just felt like it felt more like someone was writing a fetish scene to get off to than they were writing a scene to horrify the readers. The way that it was described was meant to be erotic when the whole situation is really quite fucked up and gross. And that's kind of weird, right? That's a little weird. I noticed a lot of Goodreads reviewers said that it was just ridiculous and that they would recommend skipping the entire scene because it's just gross. And I would also recommend skipping the entire book because that part was just gross. Like, we kind of know that it's happening, but it doesn't necessarily make... The abuse is already bad. This is just making it melodramatic. It's a bit silly to include, and I really feel like the editors should have done a better job at catching that and being like, this is too far. So we get to the climax of the book. As you can tell, all of these things have been happening to Rose, and she's had all of these realizations about school. She hasn't really done anything about it. The most she's done is, like, be frustrated out loud, and people are like, just stop that bad girl. And then she does stop it. And then she does it again, and they're like, just stop it, bad girl. And it just... She has these mild reactions, and she doesn't ever actually do anything about it. And it's baffling because it doesn't reflect well on her as a character, and it doesn't push the story forward, which brings me to the climax. So there's this big ball. I think it's like a Christmas ball, or an Easter ball. Like, there's some holiday. There's a ball. A lot of suitors are there. A lot of the girls are there. All of the girls are there. All of the staff is there. Everybody's assembled in this big space. Rose finds out that her love interest has been fucking a child and is upset about this, obviously. Why she's surprised about this, I don't know, but she's surprised and appalled. And she, like, exits the party because she can't handle being around him. And in the process of this, she stumbles across a bunch of her students who have set the place on fire. Apparently, they were only trying to burn a couple of documents to save one of their friends, but it turns out that they set the whole place ablaze and everybody dies, except for the couple of girls and Rose. Everyone at the school dies. The problem that I have with this is Rose is not the one setting the school on fire. Her students are the ones setting the school on fire, which makes me think that all along, Rose has not been the protagonist of her own story. Rose is not the main character. Rose is a secondary character. She's a teacher that is, I think, meant to inspire the girls into action. And the girls should have been the main characters. They were far more interesting. They seemed to have actual personalities. They actually did things. Things happened to them, and they reacted. Rose just kind of floats through the whole book. She doesn't actually do anything that influences the plot. And this is so baffling to me that the main character of this book didn't do anything. In the climax, she doesn't set the fire. The whole thing is an accident. Um, I she's not a main character. Why would you cast the secondary character and pretend that she's a main character when she doesn't do anything? So, the school burns down. A couple people survive. Rose changes her identity and gets like her dream job in Rome. Good for her. Um, and then we get a hint at the end of the book that Josie, the girl who was especially mean to Rose in class, is also has also survived, and she's restarting the school again. So Rose effectively did nothing. She never like published a book about it or spoke out about it or anything. She just managed to escape with her own life after so many innocent children died. Um, and they all lived happily ever after the end. My main problem with this book, aside from how boring it is, because the main character doesn't do anything, and aside from the gratuitous pedophilia, is the theme of this book. This book tells you that it's about feminism. It reminds you that it's about feminism. It repeatedly tells you again and again, this is about being a strong woman. This is about feminism. This is about standing up for your own rights and being able to have your own thoughts and go forward and having an education because that's what you want and making your own choices. And this is about feminism. Did I tell you this is about feminism? This book tells us that a lot. It does not show us feminism at all, like many of the men that I have dated. It says that it's a feminist, but it doesn't act like one. It's supposed to be, I think, about a woman who goes to a school where she is horrified by how archaic and awful and sexist the academics are, and she's supposed to change it. She's supposed to stop it, or at least inspire her students to stop it. That is, I think, what the author was trying to get at, but she didn't succeed. We see story after story about all of these strong Greek women who do things, who act, who see injustice, and they sacrifice themselves or their freedom or something to make the world a better place or to stand up for what they believe in. We see that time and time again because she keeps giving us all these stories to illustrate what we're learning in her classroom. And yet Rose doesn't act ever. She just watches all of this happen. She doesn't do anything. Only the girls do something, and I think we're supposed to think that they were so inspired by all of these strong Greek women and that Rose was the only reason that they did that, but I really don't think that anything would have changed had Rose not been there, had they not taken that classics class. They burned down the school because they had to save their friend. That was it. They didn't have a choice, necessarily. Like, the choice was action or not action. It wasn't, oh, do we be like a strong woman or do we fade into the background and be soft little petals? Like, that wasn't, it had nothing to do with Rose. And it just baffles me that this book about feminism has a woman as the main character who doesn't do anything, who is so completely passive, which is apparently against everything that this book is about. It tells us again and again that it's about feminism, and it doesn't show us. I also think, as a feminist hot take, that this book didn't say much. It's not adding anything to the discussion. It's clear that these women are being trained to be perfect wives. And of course, that's bad because they don't have a choice in it. And they should be allowed to have their own thoughts. There's a quote in this book that books are not for learning, they're for posture, which of course is terrible. Saying that becoming a slave to men is a bad thing is not a particularly nuanced or provocative take, outside of some very right-wing extremist groups. It's just not, we know this is bad. We know this is bad. It's not bringing anything new to the conversation. I think there's actually a more interesting point in this book. There's a head girl, Clarissa, who has the highest value of anyone, and she is kind of an antagonist for Rose because Clarissa talks more to the headmaster than Rose does, and Clarissa knows more than Rose does. And Clarissa kind of thinks that Rose is terrible, which Rose is. Clarissa has a point. There's this one conversation that I want to read to you that I think is more interesting than anything the author actually intended to say. So this is Rose. But you're almost an adult. You could do anything you want in life. You could go to university, have a career. You could be successful on your own terms. There's certainly money behind you. But you want this? Clarissa raised her chin slightly. Madam, you couldn't possibly understand. Excuse me for speaking so plainly, but look at you. You're a single woman who has to work for a living. You're alone. As far as I can tell, you have no connections, no society, no community. Except for your mother, who is poorly, I believe. And your position here is one of privilege. You have no understanding of the way things are. Rose said bracingly, I am free to make my own choices. She never makes her own choice. Clarissa replies, only within your societal limits, your financial constraints. And we're supposed to believe that Clarissa is so brainwashed that she couldn't possibly understand what it's like to have her own choices. And maybe that's true, but also Clarissa makes an excellent point in that Rose is in a position where she feels like she doesn't have a choice. She feels completely powerless. She doesn't have any agency, and she never shows any agency in the book. For all of her, I like strong women, girl boss feminism, she doesn't actually do anything. And I think Clarissa has an excellent point in that, yes, these girls are going into a system that's incredibly misogynistic, but also they have a lot more choices in life than Rose does, even after they marry these guys. And I think that's maybe a more interesting thing to unpack about how, as women, we have choices, but under capitalism, we have no choices, and how privileged women sometimes have less choices in some respects, but also Clarissa can grow up and do whatever she wants after she marries this guy. That guy's gonna be off to golf and fucking other women all the time. She can do whatever she wants. She has all the money in the world to do whatever she wants. She can divorce her husband. It's not the 1800s. And like, I really think that that's maybe more interesting to unpack than just like being a slave to men is bad. That's not adding into the conversation. That's not saying anything new. That's not giving me a new perspective. I think unpacking more of what Clarissa said would be a much more interesting book than what this ended up to be. I think I was mostly just disappointed. I wanted a cool, dark academia book for adults. It wasn't YA, but like women my own age doing cool shit in a cool boarding school. And like, this book was not that. This book just totally missed the mark. And I feel like the setting is so good that they definitely could have done something better with it. It was just lazy feminism and a character who was not the main character and a bunch of dithering in the middle. So I would not recommend reading this book. Please don't go out and read it. Go read something better. If you have any better dark academia books that you would recommend to me, please put them in the comments. I need to cleanse my brain. And if you want to see me review more bad books, like and subscribe. Okay, I'll see you later. Bye.